Hi, Gary McDonald here. I'm here at Level Up Music Academy, and the reason why I'm here is because there's a project I've always wanted to do, and Level Up Music Academy just happened to have the drum kit that's suitable for it. So what I've always wanted to do is take an old second-hand drum kit, one that's got its heads all beaten up, it's got student level cymbals on it. It's the sort of thing that you might find on Facebook Marketplace. It's been sitting in the shed for 10 years, that sort of thing. And what I want to do is record it and then do some work to it and then compare it and see if those improvements have worked. So the aim here is to try and get an old second-hand drum kit to be gig worthy. Now I don't mean world class, take it into a high-end studio or take it on a world tour type worthy. I'm talking, could you get away with it at a gig on a Friday night or Saturday night with a country band, a rock band or something similar? All right. Could you take it to your local battle of the bands and use it? So Level Up Music Academy have kindly let me have a look at their drum kit, and it's a 1990s model Pearl Export, late 1990s. So we're talking 97 through to about 2000, somewhere around there. And it's been beaten up. The heads are old and worn out, and there's student level cymbals. In fact, let's just have a look at it. Here it is. Okay, so the drum kit in question here is a late 1990s model Pearl Export, probably from about 1997, 1998, somewhere around there. And the reason why I got a bit excited about doing the project with this particular drum set is because if we look at it, we can see that it still has the original drum heads from when it was sold. So if we look at the toms, we can see the Pearl logos on the top. And if we look at the underside or the resonant heads, we can see that they've also got the Pearl logos on it as well. So that's a pretty good indication that these are the original heads that came with this drum set. The bass drum has the Pearl logo front head on it. So that's probably the head that came with this kit. However, if we have a look at the batter side of the bass drum, we can see that probably isn't the head that came with this kit, although it could be. However, it is a cheaper head by the looks of it, and it's got a lot of gaffer tape and stuff all over it, trying to muffle it. The snare drum has a coated ambassador head on it, so that's a professional quality head. However, it looks pretty worn, so it's probably due for a swap out. And if we flip the snare drum over and we look at the snare side, we can see that again, it's still got the original drum head that came with the snare drum. And likely they are the original snare wires as well. The drum kit does have a little bit of damage to it. So if we look at one of the resonant heads here, we can see that there's a small hole in one of the resonant heads, so that will likely affect the sound. We can see that the tension rods here have a lot of corrosion, so I'll probably have to clean that off, or at least hopefully it doesn't interfere with the turning of the tuning rods. And this tom has a bolt missing from the mounting system, so the nuts from that bolt are just rattling around inside the drum. So it'll be interesting to see if that actually comes out on the recording or not. The cymbals are ZBT Plus or Zildjian ZBT Plus, which is kind of like a student level or entry level set of cymbals. And they were made or launched, I think, in about 1998, so late 1990s. And they stopped production of them, I think, somewhere around 2002. So it is highly likely that these are the cymbals that actually came with this kit back in the late 90s. So this kit is pretty much as per 1997, 1998, but as you can see, it has been played quite a bit. So if we look at the heads here, we can see that there's a lot of dents, a lot of abrasions, and these heads are very worn. So it'll probably sound bad, probably. I haven't played it yet, so we're about to find out. In the bass drum, there looks like there's some sort of bedspread or doona or pillow or something in there. A lot of people like to stick a lot of muffling in their bass drums. I don't, so that'll probably be something that comes out, but I'll have to investigate that. And I think that's about it. So that's the drum set, and we'll see what this thing sounds like in a few minutes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the drum kit and I'm going to record it as is. I'm not going to try and tune it. I'm not going to do anything to it. I'm just going to record some sound samples and just see what it sounds like as it is, with its old beaten up heads and its student left cymbals. And then after that, I'm going to try and tune it. Note how I say try and tune it, because it's going to be really hard to try and tune this thing to sound any better. But I'll see what I can do. Then I'm going to strip all the heads off it. I'm going to clean it up and I'm going to service it, and I'm going to try and tune it properly, and then we'll do another recording and compare that to the very original. And then I'm going to put my professional level cymbals on it and see how that affects it. And then we might do a couple of recordings with a few different microphones and see how different microphones affect the sound of the drum kit as well. So the idea here is to see if we can take an old second-hand drum kit that's old and beaten up and see if we can, do something with it to make it more usable. So now we've got our bass level recording, we know what it sounds like. Let's see if we can get it to sound a bit better. So several years ago I recorded a basic video on how I go about tuning drums. You can go watch that if you want to know the process of what I go through when I do it. And I'm going to apply some of those ideas and see if we can get this drum kit to sound a bit better. The first thing I'm going to have to do is rip out whatever is in the bass drum, so probably a doona or a bedspread or something. So I'll remove that and I'll see if I can tune the toms to some sort of pitch that is a bit more melodic. See if I can get rid of some of those horrible overtones. And I'll see if I can balance out the snare a little bit as well. Alright, let's see how we go with that. So I've spent the last 2 hours or so messing around with the drum set, trying to tune it. Notice how I say trying to tune it, because it was actually a lot harder than I thought it was going to be, and even now it still sounds atrocious. So the snare drum, the top head was around a D, but it was so out of tune I couldn't really lock it down. So I've tried to tune it, the top head to a C and the bottom head to an E. Again, it's not great because the heads are shot and the tuning rods are quite corroded, so it's quite hard to turn the actual screws properly. The 12-inch tom, one of the screws has come out of the mounting bracket for the tom, and the nuts are just rattling around inside the drum. So that'll be an added part. When I take the drum apart and service and swap the heads over, then I'll fix that problem. So the 12-inch tom and the 13-inch tom, the drum heads are the batter heads, the top heads, are so worn that they can't hold tone at all, really. And the floor tom's not too bad. It had some gaffer tape, but again, the heads are so old that it's not holding tone very well. So what I was aiming for was an E3, a C sharp 3, and an A2 if we're descending. So what I was aiming for was this. I'll play it again. E3, C sharp 3, A2. As you can tell, the first two toms are really sour. Okay, there's tone there, but it's all coming from the resonant head, not the batter head. The batter heads just are sour and crinkled and almost rattly in a way. All right, the bass drum, I've taken what was a sleeping bag that was in there, taken that out. And now the bass drum's bigger, fatter, rounder, but again, still not holding a real good sound. Okay, definitely fatter than before though. So it'll be interesting to see what happens once we actually put new heads on that. That should actually come up pretty good. All right, so I'll put this thing back together and we'll do another recording, and we'll be able to compare the recording of the tuned kit to the original sound, and we can see what that's going to sound like. So in my opinion, the bass drum is starting to sound a bit more like a bass drum. I had to take out, I think it was a sleeping bag and a towel. The toms are still very hard to work with because they're so dented and bashed up, but think you can kind of tell they're a little bit more melodic than what they were before. There's a little bit more ring to them and things like that. Again, still not great. The snare drum has become a little less ringy and a little bit more usable, but let's see what happens when we service the drum kit completely and we strip it all back and change all the heads. Okay, I think you can tell that there's a pretty big difference there. All right, so now we're starting to get somewhere. Again, it's not amazing, but it's definitely a lot more usable than what the original drum kit was. All right, let's see what this thing sounds like when we swap out the student level ZBT Plus cymbals for a more serious set of cymbals. So I've decided to stick my Bosphorus traditional series cymbals on there. So it's a 21-inch ride, a 16-inch crash, and a set of 14-inch hi-hats. All right, now we're talking. Okay, so we've got something that's definitely usable now. You could play a battle of the bands with this. You could do a gig on a Friday or Saturday night with this, especially if you've got a decent sound engineer who can EQ a few things and you've got more time to spend on the drum kit. So I've only had access to this thing for 24 hours. So if it's your drum kit, you can fiddle with it a little bit each day for a period of weeks, months, whatever, and really dial in your sound and become used to exactly what that drum kit could do.